Support for Character Crusade comes from audiobooks.com. Audiobooks make it possible to enjoy a story, learn something new, or find inspiration anytime, anywhere. And with more than 60,000 titles available, audiobooks.com makes it easy and convenient. Simply set up your account and start downloading your favorite books to your mobile device. Right now, you can start a free 30-day trial and select the book of your choice to get started. Go to book.charactercrusade.com and start listening today.
You're listening to Character Crusade.
Greetings, Crusaders. You're listening to Character Crusade Skyrim Roleplay Workshop. I'm Stu.
And I'm Joe.
And I'm Matt.
And tonight we have an interview with Alastair Stephens, and we are going to be talking about character creation and more specifically about how you map out your character's progression over levels across quests that may not necessarily be tailored to you. So this kind of dovetails nicely into our whole discussion we've been having on this podcast about how to sort of weave quest lines together to make a more complete story for your character.
That's amazing.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's like a little weaving of the last 14 episodes.
I know. I'm really excited about it.
The character loom.
Yes. Character rough spun.
Episode 15. Rough spun.
Rough spun.
Ooh, it
Yeah.
chafes.
It can be whatever we want it to be until we make the graphics,
Exactly.
right?
But we'll learn a little bit more about Alastair and all the kind of cool things he's got going on a little bit later.
Awesome.
For now, we've got a whole bunch of announcements, so I think it's time for us to get into leveling up.
Well, it sounds like some great new news from a Patreon supporter who started off very early. Liam. Thank you, Liam.
Thank you, Liam.
Yay, Liam.
We've been singing your praises for the last few minutes. First of all, because you decided to throw down after listening to what we're relatively sure is the worst podcast ever.
Well, for us.
For us.
For us, yes.
I'm sure there are worse ones. But Liam joined at a level that really, honestly, makes a difference for us.
It does.
Everybody else's contributions are so appreciated. They really are. We say that every time when folks join us on Patreon at the $15 a month level. The perks change a little bit, though, for Liam.
Yeah.
And so, Liam, you'll start to see some access to things via our perk tree pretty soon. And there are some amazing things that are in the works here in the Character Crusade Workshop that are going to be available only to the Patreon supporters. So if you have been waiting to make a decision to join us on Patreon, please do so, because we have some things we would like to share with you.
Yeah. Send a message to Liam just today, letting him know that as a $15 contributor, he is able to actually direct an episode of this podcast. So he gets to call the shots in terms of the topics that we cover. If he would like, we will also do a critique of one of his characters for him on this podcast, provide him with some feedback. So that ought to be pretty cool. So Liam, take your time, figure out what it is you want to cover, and let us know. We'll be all over it.
Super excited. In addition to that, I think that was our only Patreon bump for the last since the last episode. But we did get some more 5-star ratings on iTunes for those
wonderful,
stealthy iTunes listeners who are not leaving us a review. We can't call you out, but we can just say that we love the ratings. It really helps us a lot.
Really appreciate that. We've got a lot of 5-star ratings in there. In fact, there's nothing but 5-star ratings in there at the moment, which is terrific. We're really glad that our content is resonating with people. That is huge for us and very gratifying, so thank you. Well, tonight's episode is really special because, ladies and gentlemen, this episode marks the beginning of our broadcast on YouTube that includes actual video gameplay footage. So, we're into this about 6 months now. Y'all been saying, how about some gameplay footage? And, we had been having some discussions about how we could make that happen. And we have kind of taken some time here after 6 months to sort of reorder the way that we do our production work. Matt has taken on a lot of the audio production, which has freed me up to do more video production. And I think that change right there has given us the freedom to start doing something special, which is to actually provide some video footage, some gameplay footage for you to watch while you listen to this podcast. But because this is Character Crusade, we can't just leave it alone. It can't be just footage. We have to do more than that, of course.
Always more.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is this character, the character's name is Nim. If you haven't seen a preview of him, go out and check out the latest video on Couch Warrior TV, Skyrim Anthology episode number 2. There's a little bit on the end there about Nim. And basically what we're going to do is we've created a character. His name is Nim. He's a dark elf, and he is going to be kind of the Character Crusade, the equivalent to Character Crusade mascot, if you will. So Nim is going to be the one that you'll be following when you actually watch this. And we're going to try something really fun here. We're going to do kind of a choose your own adventure kind of scenario here. So we've created the character, but you guys will decide what Nim does every couple of weeks.
Sweet.
So the way we're going to do this is we're going to use some YouTube cards. So while you're watching, there are going to be cards popping up. They're basically YouTube annotations, and you'll have options, choice A and B or choice A, B, and C. You pick one as you're watching, and these questions will be related to things like, where is Nim going to go next? What is he going to pursue next? It could be even as granular as what armor will he wear? What god will he worship? And so we'll kind of start to forge this character together as we go. And essentially, anytime you click on a card that has the answer you've chosen, that goes straight into our YouTube analytics, and we're able to go and take a look at that afterward and find out who's voting for what. And so as we tabulate those results, we will be steering Nim in that direction. And then with each subsequent episode, you'll get more choices. So it's basically like a great big fat community choose your own adventure game, which I think could be really fun. And you know what? We're in messing around on YouTube anyway. So adding some simple annotations to tabulate the votes is not a big deal at all. So hope you enjoy it. It'll be a lot of fun, I think. Again, because you're going to be listening to the podcast, the game audio will be turned down. So as a result, you're not going to be able to hear what's going on in game, but we have turned all the subtitles on so you can read all the dialogue. And we may take this video and then post it in its raw form on a new YouTube channel, which is our Character Crusade YouTube channel. And you can go there if you want the full unedited game experience. But you know, those videos will probably be a week or two behind what you're actually seeing along with the podcast. So that is pretty exciting. We think that's pretty awesome. We hope you enjoy it. And hopefully this will take care of any of you who have just been profoundly bored listening to our podcast on YouTube with no footage. Sorry.
We snuck in some footage when you were doing the fleet walkthrough, right? The Q&A.
Yep.
Lots of unused footage. This is footage dedicated just for this character. And that's what makes it so cool. It's a start of a new character, guided by the community of folks who are joining us. Whether you're on Patreon or not, well, maybe there'll be some sneaky things on Patreon. We'll have to see. But please, if we don't see your vote, this is like real Character Crusade democracy, I suppose. Where you want to go, you got to vote. If you don't vote, well, you might be sad at the outcome.
Make sure you click on those vote cards. We have introduced the concept early on to our Patreon community and allowed our Patreon supporters to actually establish what the basic background story is for Nim. And so that will be posted as well for everybody to review. It's only a 1-paragraph synopsis of why he's in Skyrim and roughly what his mission is. But all the rest of you will be able to help guide us along there. So if you've got ideas, please feel free to contribute them. Otherwise, vote, vote, vote.
And if you want early entry, get into Patreon.
Yeah.
$1 a month is really all it takes.
$1 a month. $1 a month, people.
$1 a month.
All right. Let's move on. All right, Crusaders, joining us tonight is Mr. Alastair Stephens. Alastair is half of the brain trust behind Storywonk, storywonk.com.
A third of my best day. I'm a third of the brain trust.
A third? Oh, okay. Well, I enjoy your third. You know, and I would say that one of the things that I enjoy the most about your podcast is kind of the rapport that you and Lonnie have, and the way that you kind of just rap about different story-related topics. One of the things that I thought was really interesting is about a year ago, I started listening to your Outlander podcast, and I was so entertained by it that I listened to every single episode, and I hadn't even seen Outlander. You know, like, and I still haven't seen Outlander, but I'm just kind of living the story vicariously through you guys, and I just think that's really great. Maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and kind of what you and Lonnie have built over the years.
Well, we are self-described story experts, I suppose, which is a description that always makes us feel just a little uncomfortable, but it's probably the closest description for what we do, which is talk and teach about stories and storytelling. We try and strip as much of the magic and the mysticism out of storytelling and get it back to good, solid, dependable craft. We have a philosophy that we talk about. I host a thrice weekly writing podcast, a little 10-minute short podcast called The Journeyman Writer, that speaks to our philosophy that in order to tell stories, you have to tell stories. You have to be passionate about them and care about them. And that's true too for people who just love stories. You know, we all spend our days surrounded by narrative in a million different forms and a million different themes. And understanding that shared cultural inheritance, it makes your appreciation of pop culture so much richer, so much fuller, so much more rewarding. So that's the kind of thing that we do. And we host, 6 active podcasts at the moment. We're always threatening to add another. But yeah, we do a lot. We produce something in the region of 8 hours of podcast material every week. We do, on top of that, classes, and we offer editorial services for up-and-coming publishers who want to self-publish their work. So it's a busy life, but it's an inordinately rewarding one. And I get to talk to you guys about story in Skyrim, which is pretty great.
Amazing.
Yeah, we were
Very cool.
excited to talk to you because, the whole focus of our podcast is trying to help people figure out how to make a game like Skyrim into the narrative that speaks to them, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of different tricks and things that a person can do to pull that off, but we're very interested in getting your perspective on that. I think one of the other things that I find very interesting is that there's a lot of the content on your website. There are a lot of things in your podcast that I just really don't know anything about, but there's something about the presentation that I really like. I listened to your episodes on season 1 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I was never a follower of that show. Never watched it. Never watched a complete episode, but somehow I found your podcasts interesting because I'd always kind of had, I think, probably a lot of misconceptions about what Buffy really was. And I think what's kind of cool is how you guys are able to kind of, like you're saying, strip away all the garbage and kind of reveal the gem of the story that's inside there. And you guys are also, I think, pretty honest about when it doesn't hit the mark too, which I really kind of appreciate as well.
Yeah,
But
that's always been our intent.
Yeah.
We were having these discussions when we met. In fact, we met over the internet talking about stories, talking about storytelling. So the podcasts that we produce now are basically the evolution of those conversations. And honestly, if we had our mics with us, if I carried my mixer with me in a little messenger bag, we'd probably produce twice as many podcasts every week, just talking about the stories that we encounter, talking about the movies we've seen or the audiobooks that we've listened to,
Right. So you're doing a series right now. I've listened to the first 2 episodes on Star Wars.
I am, yeah.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm doing at the moment these, we've been doing them all year, in fact, these seminar series. It's an opportunity to delve into a given text in a really careful and thoughtful way, stripping out as much of the cultural association, as much of the behind the scenes information, trying to look as closely at a given text as we possibly can. So we started back in January with Diana Gabaldon's Outlander novel. That was a really interesting journey. We followed that up with the first Harry Potter novel. Then we looked at Pride and Prejudice. And now we're looking at Star Wars, all 6 of the movies in chronological order, in release order, I should say. I've got to be very careful about the order that I'm referring to.
I'm really very interested in how you've jumped genres and
that's a spectrum.
authors. And
Yeah.
the context of each of these is amazing.
Well, story is story. There's value to be found. I think that excellence is a common factor in and of itself. And I think that we all have that experience, no matter how deeply we're entrenched in fantasy or in science fiction or in romance, for example, the truly great works will speak to us. We'll find things in, popular culture, in particular stories, in movies and books and television shows that just connect with us. So I throw out these, short lists of 5 or 6 different texts every few months to my listeners over on the Storywonk Seminar series, and then they vote, they decide. So I think the second choice for Star Wars, if it wasn't going to be Star Wars, I was going to do an 8-week course on fairy tales. If not that, I was going to look at the origins of Spider-Man, and if not that, I was going to look at Douglas Copeland's novel, Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture. So this idea of this agnostic approach to storytelling, not bound by genre, not limited by form, but really looking at narrative, because narrative, the core bones of storytelling, it's the same wherever you go, whether you're looking at movies or comic books or video games.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. Like I was listening to, I think it was not the intro Star Wars episode, but episode 2, the one where you kind of really start to dig into the first movie. Where you referred to that as New Hope or something like that?
New Hope,
Yeah.
episode 4.
Yeah, which I use for clarity. A lot of people don't like the New Hope title because that came along later, but for the purposes of clarity, I need to talk about Star Wars as a series and then A New Hope as an individual movie.
Well, what I found most interesting, there were a couple things in there that really kind of surprised me. The first one was at the end when the discussion of who the protagonist and antagonist really were in that movie, in that story. And then the other was this whole idea that you were discussing about how Star Wars really is not science fiction at all. And I was like,
Yes.
what? I mean, I guess I always automatically thought, oh, Star Wars, that's science fiction. But after you described it, I was like, okay, I actually get what he's saying now. It's fantasy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
But I think the difference is important to note, right? I mean, we
Mhm.
think about science fiction perhaps a little bit more distantly mechanical in my mind than I think some of the story that comes out of Star Wars, which could have happened just about anywhere, whether it was in space with droids or whatever.
yeah, well,
Exactly,
it was
yeah.
based on, you were basically explaining that how it was classified was based on its intent, I think, right?
Yeah, this is rooted in a discussion that I've been having for the last few years, and I've kind of been refining my approach to genre because I come, as much as I love movies and television, I come from books. You know, books were the stories that sustained me through my childhood in Scotland. And when I look at our understanding of genre, particularly as it relates to printed material, it's kind of shot. It kind of makes no sense. It doesn't make sense for there to be a genre like romance that is defined as a particular set of tropes and purposes sitting alongside YA, which speaks to a particular audience. So our understanding of genre, at least in terms of where books are shelved in Barnes and Noble, is kind of shot. So I took it back to first principles. This is my, philosophy training. I studied philosophy at university for a few years, so I still have just the barest skills when it comes to this kind of analytical thought. So I went back and I looked at, the purpose behind fiction. And Edgar Allan Poe wrote a fantastic essay called The Philosophy of Composition. And in it, he basically broke down the purpose of storytelling. The purpose of storytelling is what he called the unity of effect. It's eliciting a singular emotional response from the reader. And that emotional response is the core of our understanding of genre. If you want that giddy, dizzy, trippy feeling of falling in love, then you go to romance, because romance novels are the novels that give you that feeling. If you want to be frightened, you go to horror. So I went through all the genres and figured out, they actually map really cleanly to the emotional response we get, whether that's that syrupy feeling of falling in love, or the awe and wonder of, ancient empires and the rise and fall of dynasties and generations, or, whatever it is that we go for, the rush and thrum of adrenaline in our veins as we're reading the latest thriller. And it broke down when I got to science fiction and fantasy, because science fiction and fantasy obey different rules. The only thing that unites them, and horror too, I guess, the only thing that defines speculative fiction is that they're counterfactual. They're not the real world. They don't purport to tell us stories about the real world.
Okay.
So when I got into that, it took me months and months. And if you go back and listen to, my earliest podcast from 2010, 2011, you can hear me work through this over the course of months. But it eventually struck me one day that the difference is in intent, but it's not the intent of the idea or even the intent of the execution or the medium or the form. It's whether or not the story seeks to stimulate us intellectually, like mysteries do. Mysteries are another great, the thing that distinguishes mysteries and thrillers, for example, would be that mysteries seek to stimulate us intellectually. They give us the reward of the puzzle or the speculation or the philosophy or the perspective, whereas thrillers give us excitement. They give us an emotional rush, an emotional reward. Science fiction is rational. Fantasy is emotional. And every time I say that, I have to give this disclaimer saying emotional isn't worthless. It's not lesser. It's not easy. It's not, it's not in any way diminished. It's hard to tell a good fantasy story.
Right.
Just as it's hard to tell a good science fiction story. Star Wars is all about the adventure. It's all about the emotion. We engage with this on such an intuitive and fluid level that when we stop to pick it apart and we wonder, well, why is this? And what is that? And how does this thing work? That's when Star Wars tends to fall apart. It gets a little shaky.
Right.
So I would contrast Star Wars as a fantasy with Star Trek as a piece of science fiction in most of its incarnations, at least. I'm sorry, that was a very long tangent. I apologize.
No, I think that's
Oh,
fascinating.
it is, absolutely.
But
Yeah.
when you dismantle some of our ideas of what we think common genres are, it starts to make a little bit more sense. It really
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that we can see that in games like Skyrim, in the way that they echo, Skyrim in particular echoes, some of our oldest stories. It draws forth our notions of epic heroism. It traces a route back through, Anglo-Saxon and Nordic culture, all the way back to the oldest myths that we have, the oldest stories that we tell each other are stories of, monsters in the sky and the great heroes who rise up to battle them.
It's so true.
And I just thought it was a romance video game.
Well, it can be if you install the right mods, I guess.
Yes.
I'm still running modless. Apparently, I'm not getting that yet.
Oh. Well, I think I find that particularly interesting way to define science fiction, because then, you always hear these arguments among people who are science fiction readers or authors, where there's subgenres of science fiction, some of which are considered like hard science fiction, right? Where,
Yeah.
they have to follow all the rules of science and technology as we know it, And I think that those authors who claim to write in that subgenre are held to a very high standard when it comes to things like, accuracy and legitimate scientific theory and stuff by their readers, and they can get absolutely picked apart.
As Andy Weir will tell you this week, as The Martian is released, and there are 1,000 think pieces all over the internet picking apart the science. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a difficult thing to jump into, knowing that you're going to get picked apart. But the story part of it is what I think reaches us on a visceral level, on a logical level. You can pick apart the science as long as you want to.
Yeah.
But if you sit in the theater or you're wrapped around, VR goggles or whatever you're going to do to watch it in the future, entering into that experience, I think, is far, far more emotionally appealing than anyone describing whether or not the science is right.
Well, somehow I can picture in my head Andy Weir, sitting at his computer writing this thing and being so sick of all the factual scientific stuff that he just wants to write a story and says, all right, I'm just going to say he's going to science the shit out of it. That's enough. I don't want the details. He's just sciencing the shit out of this thing.
He raised his hand on high and cast the spell magic.
You mean that wasn't based on a real story?
That wasn't real? Well,
I've got to go see it.
Well,
yeah, I know. I'm excited.
It's actually kind of a fun movie.
Is it? You went to see it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it
My-
yet, but
Jealous,
so
uber
many people
jealousy.
recommended the book that I just had to,
Yeah,
to
well,
read the book. And it's
My
just great.
wife and my oldest son, well, my kids in general, are much bigger readers than I am, and so they both read the book, and they actually said that it followed the book really well.
Oh,
I mean,
good. That's good to
It
hear.
left out a lot of the, speaking of science, details and the minutia of the science, which just, it's hard to get that to translate into a movie. But
Right.
for the most part, they said that it followed the book pretty well.
Well, that's cool.
So,
I'm excited about that, too. I had a lot of people recommend that book to me as well, but never got around to it, at least not yet. So,
There's an excellent audio version of that book that I highly recommend.
yeah.
Yeah.
You've
very
listened
good.
to that?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't get to read books very often now
Uh-huh.
because I can really only read when I'm, exercising or running out to the store or something. So Audible is my lifesaver. I listen to so many books.
Yeah. I'm the same way. My commute to and from work and, out in the yard doing work and wherever it is, I'm listening to books all the time. So I completely understand. Time is limited. So,
Right.
well, so I guess, what are some things, Alastair, that you're interested in plugging? I mean, you've got a lot of different things going on. Our audience is, very, very interested, of course, in games and so forth. But one of the things that is a common thread amongst our listeners is the love of story. And I think that storywonk.com certainly has a lot to offer anybody who's interested in story. But is there anything in particular that you'd like to plug, or things that you've got coming up that you're excited to let people know about?
Oh my God. Right now, I'm just trying to get out ahead so that I can hopefully take some time off over Thanksgiving. I'm already thinking about that. But the thing I'm most proud of right now, I think, is the Journeyman Writer podcast, because we've developed this really great and positive, community of writers and readers. The number of people who listen to this writing-based podcast who don't write, who have no interest in telling stories, constantly surprises me. So that's a really great place to get these little 10-minute chunks of hopefully insight, some kind of commentary at least, on the art and craft of writing and on creativity in general. I think that there are so many overlaps between, whether you're a writer or you're a podcast producer or you do Let's Plays on YouTube or you make your own games or you're drawing a comic book, whatever your particular form of creativity is, there are universal factors that influence that creativity. It's very, very easy to be discouraged, and it's very, very easy to be defeated and to worry about the time that you're spending on this thing that you love. And that's kind of that's one side of the Journeyman Writer podcast. So, but storywonk.com, you'll find something over there, I'm sure.
Well, you've got a lot of stuff going on out there too. You've got a YouTube channel. You've got actually a fair number of videos out there. I was interested to see you and Lonnie actually playing World of Warcraft together and recording it, which I thought was pretty cool.
We do, yeah. Unfortunately, that series kind of stalled out because we just ran out of time. Our schedule was a little too tight, but we did, I guess, maybe 11 episodes where we were playing a pair of orcs, just kind of talking about the lore of World of Warcraft, talking about the experience and the way that the game communicates story, because it's such a strange combination of artifice and like really powerful narrative, genuinely powerful narrative, but you have to be willing to buy into it. You have to be willing to look past the immediate facade of, well, okay, I've got this weapon and I'm going to drop this weapon and pick up a better weapon, and I'm going to go and talk to this guy with an exclamation point over his head, and he's going to make me go and collect 5 beaver tails or something. And once you get past that, once you can get past it sounds awfully judgmental. Once you can see through it, the game opens up, and it's a great medium for telling stories. I go back with the Elder Scrolls games all the way to Morrowind. I sank I don't even want to think about how many hours I spent playing Morrowind, but it was hundreds and hundreds. I think I found everything that game had to offer. Then Oblivion 2, and now Skyrim. These games are so rich. They're so varied. And if you want some epic battle against a dragon, you can have that. And if you want to go in and just wander around collecting flowers, if you want to, spend an hour going for a walk while you're listening to your favorite audiobook, you can do that. Except you get to do it, some awesome mountain range.
Which is probably more exciting than what's outside your front door, for example.
Well, I live in upstate New York, so that is clearly spectacularly beautiful at this time of year, and I would be lynched if I suggested otherwise. They're very proud of their autumnal foliage up here in upstate New York.
Yeah, we have a lot of that going on here in Minnesota as well. So especially up on the North Shore this time of year, there's a lot of people who escape to the North Shore this time of year just to see nothing but, the leaves and the lake. And
we did that a week and a half ago. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's the best.
It's a short-lived.
We can compare photographs on Twitter.
We should do that.
I have to compare the North Shore to New Hampshire and Vermont, where I spent a long time up there, spending time with friends and folks on the upper end of the Pioneer Valley, but also up in the White Mountains. It's an amazing part of the country. So we have lots of friends in Albany, Guilderland area there in New York, and friends in Buffalo as well. But I haven't been out that part of the world for foliage in a long time, so I do rely on Skyrim quite a bit.
Well, at least the Rift.
Right.
Colors are beautiful in the Rift. Actually, all year
All
round.
year
round.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, this is fantastic. I think the next step for us here is to jump into our play theory segment, where we're going to talk a little bit about some character creation ideas. And then we're going to jump into this concept that we discussed earlier about how we can think about what is offered up to us in terms of storyline in the game, and how we can interpret that, or how we can look at those adventures through the lens of the characters that we've created to make it more our own, to make it more impactful, to make it more of an interesting and completely personalized narrative experience. I'm excited to have that conversation because it's something that we talk about a lot, but getting an outside perspective, I think, is always helpful because it generates new ideas or new ways for us to look at this game that many of us have played through many, many times. And I'm always surprised, I get immersed in a character who kind of has one particular view of the world, and I think that it wouldn't be possible for me to play a character who is capable of, doing something mean or nasty or whatever. But then I discover that when I set out with the intent to create a character that is that way, that once I'm playing that character and I'm in that headspace, I can't help but be mean to people. I just love being mean to people. It's like I have to be, and it feels like the right thing to do, because I'm coming at it from that brain space, right? So I'm excited to talk about that. And then we're going to do some Crusader mail. Alastair's going to help us answer a listener question.
Yep.
Right?
Can't wait.
Joe's got it all picked out for us. All right. So stick around for Play Theory. Welcome back, Crusaders. This is the Play Theory segment. Alastair is joining us for a conversation about character creation. And I think one of the things we want to hit on is what we mentioned just before the break, kind of how to take what is offered by the game. And it isn't just Skyrim. Any open world game offers you, a certain set of canned quests and so forth, how to kind of make those your own, right? And look at the larger story arc of your character, how these things might fit together and how you might approach them. I think to kick off our discussion, I'd like to just kind of touch on this idea of character creation. I think that it's a good foundation for some of the stuff that we'll talk about going forward, because we've had podcast episodes in the past where we've discussed this idea of creating character weakness and so forth. A few weeks ago, Alastair, I attended one of your online seminars on creating characters.
Yes, that was a really fun. That was a really fun class, and I know the word that you took away from that seminar, the most important word when it comes to character creation.
Yes, vulnerability.
There it is.
Yes,
yeah.
There it is. And I really wanted to discuss that in particular because we've kind of talked about this issue of character weakness. But I thought your take on vulnerability in a character was kind of interesting because you had kind of a very clear and interesting way of building other attributes on top of that to create more of a cohesive character. In other words, not vulnerabilities for the sake of vulnerabilities, but, vulnerabilities that are impacting the character in other ways that make particular sense for the character's background or motivations or goals and things like that.
Yeah, when you are looking at any character in any kind of fiction, whatever the medium, whatever the form, you're really looking at a collection of strengths, those things a character can do. You're looking at weaknesses, those things a character cannot do. And most importantly, you're looking at vulnerabilities, those things which can harm the character, can hurt the character, those things which pierce the armor no matter how powerful the armor is. It is vulnerability, looking at this psychologically, getting away from narrative theory for just a second. It is vulnerability that allows us as human beings to connect emotionally and empathically with each other. If you see someone who is polished and perfect and has no weakness to them, you don't care about that person. You are seeing someone who is, this perfect smooth facade. If you see on the street, a kid crying, or you see someone looking lost or confused, when you see that someone can be hurt by something or is being hurt by something, then you connect with that person emotionally. I recommend the work of the brilliant psychologist Brené Brown. She did a fantastic TED Talk on the power of vulnerability, and the book that I guess she was promoting with that TED Talk is just fantastic. It's so profound when it comes to giving us insight into what makes some characters work and some characters not. The example that I always go to show the difference between strengths and weaknesses and vulnerabilities is Superman, because here is a character who so rarely is given adequate vulnerability. Superman has all the strengths you can imagine. He can fly and has super strengths, and he's invulnerable. He's just great. And he has weaknesses too. That's what kryptonite was invented for, is to give Superman a weakness.
Right.
That is something that he can't fight. And I guess technically, if you're a DC Comics nerd, and I imagine there are a few of them in the audience, magic also would be a weakness for Superman.
Right.
But his vulnerability is Lois, and it's Jimmy, and it's the people that he loves, the people he can't fully protect, the people who can be hurt and thus can hurt him. It's the 1,000, screams and cries for help that he hears in the night that he can't help, that he can't save. Vulnerability is what opens the character up. So when you talk about vulnerability and the importance of vulnerability, that's the kind of first pass. Think about what makes your character emotionally accessible in that way. But that's not enough, because you can't just have characters walking around who are open wounds. We generally don't care so much about stories about those people, I guess. You need to take that vulnerability and turn it into a goal, because a character's vulnerability, whether it's a single vulnerability or 2 or maybe 3, you don't want to overload characters, I guess. Those vulnerabilities are going to inform how they see the world. They're going to inform what is most important to them, and thus they're going to speak to what that character wants to accomplish, what they want to change or achieve or overcome. If you have a character who grew up poor, a character for whom every ill that they saw in their childhood was a function of economics, was a function of insufficient money, that character is probably going to grow up to want to achieve wealth. Perhaps to use that wealth to achieve some kind of social justice in their, small town somewhere out there in the realm of Skyrim. But they're going to want to do something that in some way speaks to or compensates for or addresses their vulnerability. And once you know what a character's goal is, you know what their story is.
Yeah, I think so. And then that sort of helps to inform what actions you take in Skyrim in terms of what things you might naturally pursue versus those things which you might not care about. I like that idea. And I guess from your perspective, you've played Skyrim. I mean, when you're playing through that game, what kind of narrative do you have going on in your head when you're thinking about making decisions in game or what quest to pursue?
Well, I think it's interesting. We were talking earlier about doing the right thing. We were talking about, you can be evil in the right circumstances with the right motivation. I can't. I have this weird hang up where it doesn't matter what game I'm playing. I have to play by the rules. I can't play, for example, Grand Theft Auto or even Red Dead Redemption, which was a much more complicated, Western open world game. I just can't be the bad guy. So I always have to take the Boy Scout. I have to do the right thing. And so I usually end up playing, exile archer characters because I like the sneak mechanics. And this speaks to, I think, playing a video game like this, authoring your story, controlling your character, setting your own goal. It's not an act of sole authorship. It's a collaboration with all the many systems that the game has, all the verbs that the game provides you with to take action. So while you're collaborating with the game, you need to find something that is harmonious with the game systems, that will be rewarding within those game systems and will also be satisfying to you. I remember playing Morrowind years ago and leveling up an archer character. And archery is broken in Morrowind. It's a broken skill. And once you level up to a certain point, it's the death button. You can just kill anything you like with a click of your mouse. And I had to abandon that character because that level of power didn't speak to my narrative, So you've got to accommodate the game systems, and those systems, of course, are endlessly mutable with the addition of mods and patches and revisions and gameplay limitations. So right now I've just started a new Nord character, and I'm aiming to play the game straight this time. I kind of want to give as much ground to the game as I possibly can. So I'm playing it. The only 2 mods I have installed are Sky UI, because I'm playing on my PC, and what am I, an animal?
Hey now, be careful.
I'm playing with Sky UI, and I'm playing with Frostfall, the wilderness weather, that awful thing, because that keeps me engaged in the traveling from place to place. Oh, and I have a kind of voluntary restriction that I won't fast travel. So with those restrictions in place, trying to get this kind of gritty, grounded experience of Skyrim, I hope to learn more about the game systems, more about the themes and the depths of the story, to see if possibly some other characters present themselves to me, like one of the Beast Race characters, which I was never interested in playing until listening to your podcast. So if I ever roll up an Argonian or a Khajiit, you guys are responsible.
Excellent. I would just like to say that I'm playing Skyrim in 8-bit mode compared to SkyUI. So. Everyone here has been talking about SkyUI for months. I still have not installed any mods because I'm, for some horrible, stupid reason, dead set on not installing any mods until I get like past level 20.
No, I can appreciate that, because you want the authored experience, particularly the intro of the game. I'm not just talking about Helgen, but really everything up to Whiterun, I guess. It's leading you. It's giving you a very kind of considered and constructed and authored perspective on this world. And I think I can completely see where you're coming from, wanting to experience that as the designers intended, because of this reciprocal relationship between, you are a character and a player and an author all unto yourself. And that, I think, is what makes video games, this ludic space, it's what makes this so fascinating in terms of narrative.
Yeah, well, it is a Bethesda game too, so you're sort of obligated to start as a prisoner at least once.
This wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, right. You have to be a prisoner. Well, I think that's really kind of interesting, because I guess the further I've gotten into playing the game, the more I've wanted a departure from the authored experience, and you're finding yourself going back to it. So in your first playthrough, I'm assuming that I know you played you played the game once before. I don't know how far you made it through before, but is this desire to go back and kind of play through the authored experience just to kind of explore and see everything that's there? I mean, you'd mentioned trying to kind of explore what other character options might be available. So do you view this character you're playing now is more of an exercise in seeing what the game has to offer for future playthroughs?
It's a compromise between an exercise and a character that I'm growing, increasingly connected with. I started playing the usual kind of character that I played in Morrowind and played in Oblivion. So I rolled an Imperial character, and he, walked around with a bow, and he was very prone to sneaking and assassinating. It was that kind of character. And then you run into the companions, and you run into, I've got to fight dragons. And the game will allow you to fight dragons with a bow from a distance. The game will accommodate that within the engine. But I felt as though that wasn't quite true to the vision that I was being given, this Anglo-Saxon Norse epic of warfare, of control of the land and the sky, and the mysticism that's associated with that. So this, for me, is an opportunity to delve deep into the authored themes and quest lines of the game. This is my attempt to kind of experience this in as true and straightforward a way as possible, and so that in due course, I can go and roll up a bard, or I can go and take one of my ridiculous mage class characters. I always roll up these mage class characters, and I resolve right at the beginning, I'm not going to use a weapon, I'm not going to pick up an item, it's just spells for me. And I last about 6 hours, 8 hours.
Yeah, I think that's pretty typical, and it occurs to me as we're talking that I've created a lot of different characters in this game, and I've never really gotten a character up over level 65. And I actually think that's a reflection of what you were talking about earlier, with the character becoming so powerful that it feels like the struggle's over and they're not interesting anymore.
Yeah.
And
the power creep, the power curve in video games it's the one part of video games as a narrative form that hasn't really matured. It hasn't really caught up with what in most cases, I should say, there are certainly exceptions to this, but in most cases it hasn't matched where we are with other forms of narrative. When you watch Die Hard, John McClane doesn't get more and more powerful through the course of the movie. He gets less and less powerful. The forces of good are pushed to the brink in any film you care to mention, only to overcome during the final climax. When your character is getting more and more powerful and is outclassing increasingly, powerful enemies, it gets difficult to maintain the internal consistency of that, because you're confronted with the power fantasy, which is also a legitimate thing to go to these games for. I'm not saying it isn't cool to stand on a mountaintop and hit a dragon with lightning bolts. That's pretty awesome. But there is a point when it breaks the character.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of interesting because a while back I was thinking, man, I want to play this character, but I really don't want him to be in charge. Like I wish that there was another character in game that I could answer to. Like that I could go out and do missions for, that could be my boss and tell me where to go and what to do and who to assassinate, and I could be a henchman. Like I wanted to be a henchman.
You wanted to be a house Carl. Yeah,
well, no, I didn't want to be. Yeah, well, yeah, I guess I kind of did. But there was like no way to do that. I'm like, so I tried looking around for NPCs that did nothing but give quests. All they did was give quests. And I thought I could put this guy in a highfalutin castle, make him rich in a huge suit of armor and stuff. And I could just be his henchman and go and do missions for him and, all these kind of stuff. But that wasn't an experience that I could figure out how to have unless I was just willing to like make it all up literally in my head. And I like to create my own narrative and so forth in this game, but that was a step beyond, what I was really wanting to do. I wanted there to be some sort of underlying game structure where I was doing a mission for a reason, not just kind of coming up with some funky premise on my own that existed nowhere but inside my brain.
It's hard for anyone else to understand what you're doing, even when you try to tell it, when you've had to completely reconstruct the game around that.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that I think is interesting is how we all have very individual and unique game experiences. Like earlier this evening, Joe and I sat down and he was giving me a kind of a guided tour through some of the stuff that he had built in game. And he has basically taken Blackreach and made it into his home base. And for me,
and it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, playing through this game, like Blackreach was one of the more frightening experiences I've had in this game. And he's gotten to the point where that is his home. I mean, that's where he lives. That's his hood,
Can't wait to get back to Blackreach.
Yeah. And I know, I'm thinking about your character, Joe, in terms of sort of what you view as when you're thinking about your personal narrative, what you think about as her weaknesses and what you think about, as her sort of long and short-term objectives and how that comes into your gaming process when you're thinking about, where to go or what to do next.
Well, I think with her, I would say that her biggest weakness at the moment, or really kind of throughout, would be her desire her overreaching, her desire to overcome and kind of put herself up on high, if you will. She's come through. She came through into Skyrim as an immigrant, a hated immigrant in Windhelm, and then her parents die, and she basically runs away. And now she's like overcompensating,
right?
And trying to, I'll show you,
right?
The necromancers kick her out and put her into Blackreach. Now she's all about you'll rue the day. I will.
Yeah.
I will watch you choke on your blood.
It kind of sounds as though the antagonist in your story is the world at large. It's kind of like,
she's, I guess, without being bitter, she's bitter. So,
not outwardly so, just interactions. Just in what's going on in her head. I hate all of you.
Well, yeah, and that's really, I think, her biggest weakness is herself.
And that's a great way of connecting that vulnerability and externalizing it into a conflict that will drive your story. I think that's a great piece of character work.
So she's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed playing her a lot.
So as you're playing through different scenarios, I know you've spent a lot of time down in Blackreach just kind of setting up this place, right? I mean, this is kind of like, this is like her going back to the womb, right? This is like the safe place, right?
It's dark and it's safe and
it's solitary for the most part.
Solitary, yes.
Yeah, but she comes out. When she comes out, it's as if she comes out with a bone to pick, with the world and kind of goes about her dealings that way, right?
Yeah, and that's the way I played out kind of in my head is that, eventually the goal is to build this dark Black Reach army, and when she feels it's ready, she's going to unleash it to the surface world.
Yeah, she's got some grand plans.
Yeah, so that's
love that.
her idea, her plan. So
I love that.
that's what she's doing now, is trying to recruit people and bring them down to nurture them into her little army of darkness.
I sort of like this idea, right, where it's almost like Blackreach has become like this little incubator, and inside it is this really sort of maniacal person in the works, right? She's she's growing into this fairly significant threat to the outside world that they don't even know is there.
Well, and that's why she likes it.
Yeah, I think that's
because
very cool.
No one knows it's there. She's only aware that probably a handful of people know how to get there.
Yeah.
And she's turned from this, abandonment, left for dead situation where she was running for her life, probably huddled in a corner in tears, trying to figure out, how am I going to survive? And then, standing tall, making it out, and then saying, I made it, and you put me here, you're going to pay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So
it's interesting. Yeah, it's sort of.
So she went back to conquer her fears, which basically to conquer Blackreach.
Right. I love the whole aspect of how she sort of has this delusional idea that everybody in the world is out to get her. Like everybody collectively is responsible for her previous misfortunes.
Yeah.
And, I think that's kind of interesting.
She doesn't know any different.
Well, and that's
because everyone she runs into happens to want to take advantage of it.
Well, and that started way back when she was trying to use her alchemy that her aunt was teaching her. She saw the power to gain, and her aunt saw that she was going in a negative direction, so her aunt stopped teaching her. So that was kind of the first instance of, you're holding me back.
Yeah. What I like about that is that it's kind of, a lot of times in these kinds of, in fantasy stories, right? It's this epic thing about, when I was a kid, I saw my parents killed in front of me and there was a big, barbarian horde came through. Think about Conan, right? Think about the scene with Conan as a child, know. But
any
what this
backstory that ends with the words "and on that day I swore."
Yes, exactly, right? It's what I like is this is a little snapshot of what would be to most people what would seem like a non-event in a person's life that was formative for her, right? Being denied something and how that brought out in her or surfaced this insatiable need that she had for knowledge and for power and the resentment that she felt from being denied it. And it explains a lot about who she's become as an adult, which I think is kind of amazing.
Yeah, because really, and her parents died when she was young, but 2 years old. She wouldn't remember anything of the only people she knew that raised her were her aunt and uncle.
Right.
So it really wasn't that, hard, brutal on, Conan, watch my mother get her head chopped off.
Yeah, right.
Kind of thing.
Oh, I think that's very cool. So when it comes to things like vulnerability, I like to kind of go that direction of thinking about where my character's vulnerabilities come from, but more often than not, I think there's something more interesting and more visceral about the idea that an individual is kind of their own worst enemy and that they manufacture a lot of their own problems, but they're so invested in things being the way that they are that they're incapable of seeing the way that they damage themselves.
Sounds like he's talking about human existence.
Yeah. But, the interesting thing in Skyrim, right, is there's a lot of different ways to sort of think about vulnerability. One of the frustrations I've bumped up against in Skyrim specifically, and in other games as well, is wanting to try to simulate physical vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
That's not easy to do in game.
No, that's a real
Not
challenge.
overly,
That's where
no.
the game systems struggle, I think, to accommodate everything that we might want to do with our characters. There's no real way where you can give yourself a physical affliction, give yourself a physical, handicap in a
Right.
meaningful and kind of game functional way. So you can
Right.
role play it, but even that, it's not easy. I guess the closest the game comes is with the vampirism effects.
I was going to say the same thing.
And some of us embrace it.
Yes.
But
Surrender to the darkness.
But
Yeah, that's
there's some value to that. I think if we look at the characters that are designed to be largely infallible, they are perfect specimens of their species, right?
Yes.
You want to see them without harm, without blemish, if you will. How often does that
I
happen?
mean, you're not going to be able to create Ivan the Boneless in game.
I are the boneless. Yeah. I think one of the things that I have done in the past, and now that I think about it, is when I'm considering the whole Aranis Arcana storyline, one of the linchpins of that storyline was the main character, Fleet, losing an eye. And if you think about his transformation from being Fleet, the hunter-warrior, into becoming Cimmerian, the kind of the dark, brooding, cult-like assassin, right? There was that whole act of being betrayed by Mercer Frey and being, nearly being killed. I think that was what kicked off in my story anyway, his descent into darkness. And the way that I tried to play that off is when I started the next act of the story, there was a lapse in time, and I kind of reintroduced him to the audience with a bandage over one eye. And I basically played that character from that point on as if he were missing that eye.
Right. Yeah, because
Now-
pretty much from that point on, you never saw his face without the bandage.
Yeah, he either had a bandage over his eye or he even wore a mask that
with
only
one
had
eye.
one eye hole
Right.
in it. But thinking back on it now, if I had some of the mods available to me then that I have now, I could have taken a mod, for example, like Archery Gameplay Overhaul, and I could have used some of the tools in Archery Gameplay Overhaul to mess with my depth perception and mess up his ability with the bow a little bit, to the point where I, as a player, would have had to try to compensate for that.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and in doing some brief exploration, because I like making stories in Machinima and stuff like that, I'm always out on Nexus looking for strange things, and I'm like, has anybody created a mod that would allow my character to lose a hand or to lose an arm at the elbow? And you can't find stuff like that. And I think it's interesting. Like, if you could find something like that that would allow you to have a character that would suddenly, bang, have a disability like that you had to deal with.
Right.
I thought
That'd
that
be kinda interesting.
I thought you would just heal from amputation. Isn't that normally what happens?
I don't know. Can you conjure a new one? I don't know.
Chameleon.
Yeah. So
It feels like the kind of thing the game engine should be able to support, because there are similar, I guess not, completely developed, but there are similar physical systems present in the Fallout games that are running on the same architecture. If you get shot in the leg, at least your speed decreases. It becomes more difficult for you to move around. So those kind of limited effects, if you could, I guess, patch those into Skyrim and remove, quick healing, remove the capacity to recover from those as swiftly as our characters do,
Right.
there'd really be some consequence to that. I'm really up on the idea of physical consequence. I have been falling in love with Frostfall just over the last couple of weeks.
Oh,
Just
that's a brutal
adoring.
mod.
The
can be.
more brutal it is, I've developed a masochistic relationship with this mod, let me tell you.
So
Because the harder it is, the more I really like the way that it roots you in the environment, the way you really have to pay attention. Oh, the weather's changing.
You have to
For the
plan
first time
ahead.
ever, I have to care about that.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
And what I like about it too, though, is it also has the additional side effect of kind of forcing you into these interesting little role play moments where even when you're in the safety of a larger city, you know, you're getting ready to head out and hit the road and go somewhere. You have to plan ahead. You're like looking in your backpack like, boy, man, am I stocked up on firewood? Do I have, you know, the provisions I need? Do I have what I need in case, you know, what if, God forbid, I fell in the river? You know, all this kind of stuff, right?
It's a vastly different.
yeah.
When Joe and I were talking about it in episode 14, I hadn't even thought about changing my attire when I went into a new situation, right? You go and you're visiting folks in the castle, or you're going off to just have a drink with some friends. I'm always wearing full armor because I'm not thinking about changing into something more comfortable. Joe was always wanting something more comfortable.
So is that the kind of thing that you wish there were some kind of mod that you could install that would force you to deal with? It would add a verb set to the game that would force you to deal with you know, the clothing that you're wearing, that it would give you a negative diplomatic interaction penalty if you were dealing with someone while you're wearing your blood smeared armor.
That's what I was. That's
Right.
exactly where I was thinking about that. We don't have social contextual change within the game that would make people look on you differently as you walked in covered in mud and blood.
Sure.
Whereas Joe tends to go in and change attire because it feels natural. It never occurred to me.
I do that same thing, I think, frequently, where, you know, I'll have more than one outfit that I keep on me. And I think that, you know, it makes sense. And of course, it makes it more difficult for you to go and grab up every single bit of loot you find along the way, because you're already carrying these other things that you've decided are essential for whatever reason.
And that's why I think if you get back to Frostfall, if you have to carry along firewood and a wood axe and everything else that goes along with it, you have to be much more prepared.
Exactly.
And all of those considerations snowball into this much broader, much more complex, much more nuanced sense of your character. It's not just about the axe and the wood and the change of clothes. Suddenly that becomes, well, he keeps this dagger because this dagger is important to him. And he keeps these boots because, well, these boots are just more comfortable for when he's riding. You start to associate all of these other peripheral secondary character traits with the decisions that you're making. It keeps you actively engaged in the authorship of your own narrative.
Yep.
That is changed when you override carry weight settings and things like that too. And I know a lot of people have, and I've tried not to do that just because I want to try to understand some of the limitations. I mean, I'm a lithe cat. I'm not going to be walking around with every weapon like Duke Nukem, right? It's just one of those. I have some limitations, and I understand that I tend to collect things so that I can sell them, right? I'm living my life as a Khajiit appropriately, I suppose. But the carry weight was something in the beginning when I had this enormous hulking Nord grab everything, right? And then dump everything in little corner spaces and hope you can get them back. But again, carry weight was one of those things that some other folks I've talked to have overcome that right away. You know, I want unlimited carry weight because I don't want to be burdened with the choice.
Honestly, I've never even thought about changing the carry weight.
It occurred to me because I kept running up to it so quickly.
Yeah, you do.
Right?
Yeah. You do.
But again, it's just another part of the character development. If you opt that isn't the most important thing you're going to do, you know, just because your character doesn't show that you're dragging a wagon, I mean, that's okay, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, I think we've talked about some of these concepts before too, where, you know, you bring on a horse and you're using some kind of a mod like convenient horses to have the horse follow you rather than ride it, assuming that this is a pack horse. You know, and you're loading it down with stuff. You have this great advantage, right, that you're never encumbered when you get into battle, but you have this lodestone behind you, right, which is this horse that's just laden with all the loot you've gathered, right, which is extraordinarily valuable to you, right? And if anything happens to that horse, suddenly you're screwed, right?
Oh yeah.
I love that. I've done that many times where I just use a horse and have it follow me, and I treat it like a pack horse. And, you know, I love the animal and I care for the animal, but I rarely ride it, you know?
Can you have that instant inventory ad send it to the horse instead of to you? Because we were talking about in battle when all of a sudden you get hit with, you know, 500 gold. Whoa, hang on for a minute here. What happened?
Gold has weight. Yeah. Well, so you're playing on the computer and you have elected, well, we talked about Sky UI because you're not an animal, but Frostfall Now, as far as Frostfall goes, are you playing that on default settings, or have you like cranked it up to like super deadly mode?
No, I took it on the default settings just to get a sense of how it feels, just to see how that shakes out for me. But I'm really appreciating. Honestly, I'm role playing it more than I'm actually being bound by the mechanical restriction of the mod. It's more that I'm being so careful not to get wet, to get cold, to get out on the road with no supplies. It's really, I gotta say, your guys' episode a few weeks ago, the OP equals BS episode, which I thought was just great. That really changed my perspective on mods in general. I have always kind of liked the vanilla experience. I wanted to feel like I wasn't going to accidentally stumble upon something that was going to break the world for me. I wasn't going to walk out of the first, well, I guess be released from prison, because this is an Elder Scrolls game after all. I wasn't going to be released from prison and find, Glamdring plunged into the earth by my feet. I don't want that kind of experience.
That would be amazing.
Really I am certain there's a mod that does exactly that.
There is.
But having that, capacity for self-expression kind of baked into the game. And I guess, honestly, understanding how thoughtful and respectful and dedicated to the consistency of the world so many mod creators are, has really opened my eyes to the potential of that. So yeah, I'm just now really getting into that whole scene, and there's so much out there. I'm thrilled that there are whole towns and NPCs and quest chains that I've never explored. So
it needs
I'm
a
going to be
different
playing
word than
Skyrim
mod.
for a good long time, let me tell you.
Yeah.
It needs a different word than mod. It isn't just a modification. There's something much more deep about it, if that is what allows you to have the experience that you want.
Yeah.
Let me lay this on you. Here, what I'm hearing here is an interesting idea for a mod concept, right? Which would be, quite often when you jump in to a new character, you've got an idea in mind. You've got a rough idea where you're saying, I love the idea of this concept, and I want to play a character that fits this concept, right? But there's all these different mods out there, and the question is, how can you introduce those mods without it being crazy and game-breaking and have to jump through 20 different hoops just to feel like it makes sense to you? It would be cool to have a mod that would allow you to pick and choose certain items of equipment and gear and spell books and stuff like that, and drop them into a mod that would put them into leveled lists and just release them randomly into the world for you to find when you hit certain levels along your path, right? So that you can have Glamdring, but you get it at an appropriate time and in an appropriate place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you could even abstract that leveling list out into, one of those classic Elder Scrolls choose your own adventure sections. You get asked a series of questions about the kind of character you want to play, your experience, your goals, and they could infer from that an appropriate leveled list to feed you.
Yeah. I've often wanted that. Like, I've thought, I'm playing this character who has a very kind of specific vibe about them, and I found this item in a mod that I think would be ideal, but I don't want to give it to myself. But at the same time, there's no way for me to drop it into the game world and just find it as I'm adventuring, right? It would be interesting to have some way to do that.
Let's collaborate with a couple of modders and let's figure that out.
Yeah, we should do that.
We can help pull it all together.
It's beyond my capacity at the moment, so.
But isn't the point of the community to ask and see who can maybe answer some of the questions?
Well, that's what makes it a community.
Yes, we know some very smart people who could probably do this.
But it would be fun, because it would be a very different take. It would be the assembly of a lot of these different things we talk about separately.
Yeah. So just a little bit of background, Alastair, on the character you're playing now. You said he was a Nord, right? How far into it are you?
Oh, I'm actually just getting to Whiterun now. I was really taking my time and getting started with it. I had a couple of false starts with the character. I wanted to, think about going, sword and shield, and I wanted to test out some of the combat mechanics that I hadn't spent a lot of time with, because I've really been burning in magic and marksmanship in my previous games. So I'm just starting out now. He's moving very, very slowly. This is the idea. But I'm already, as is ever the case, already distracted by the next thing. I kind of have an idea. I have the core concept for a character next time, but I'm really looking forward to seeing how this guy interacts with the existing structures of Skyrim, because I think that there's such an interesting tension between this rich and vibrant and developed world with these memorable characters, and the fact that you are always and essentially, unless you're willing to mod and support to the contrary, a silent protagonist. You
Yes.
are incapable of directly leaving your mark on these social interactions, and I find that just fascinating. And I think that leads us toward playing stoic characters who do as they're told, because really, what are you going to do when someone gives you a quest? You're going to argue with them, you're going to push back against it, you're going to, you know,
Yeah.
You wait
these
till the next
scripted-
game has AI and it remembers that you were a
Right.
jerk last time.
Right. Right.
Well, this too, I think, is why we skew so often to internal antagonist stories, because you can set up your character's villain as, you know, any one of the many suitable villains in the game, but there's no way for the game to push back meaningfully along an unscripted path. You know, they
Right.
can't really respond to you. So we go instead to this internal antagonism where our characters are their own worst enemy, because then you control both sides of the conflict. Then you get to decide, well, no, I'm not going
Yeah.
to do this because that isn't, you know, true to this character's view of the world. So to answer your question directly, yeah, I'm just getting started with this one and really enjoying it so far, just moving very slowly through River Run there, and really enjoying taking my time and exploring and thinking about what my character wants. He is, you know, one of these guys who has just come back across the border. He's been arrested. He doesn't know Skyrim, though it's his heritage. This is his culture. These are his people. So I'm taking my time learning the lore of the world and really acclimatizing him to this conflict between the Stormcloaks and the Legion. I'm finding that enormously rewarding with this character in a way that I never did when I was playing an Imperial or playing, you know, a Breton.
So at this point, do you have a sense of this character's what kind of vulnerabilities he might have?
I think it's looking for a home. I think this is he has had this, and I'm authoring this character a little less because I want to be open to what the game is giving me. So
Okay, a little more
I'm
spontaneous.
controlling this guy. Yeah, a little bit at least, because God knows I can't help but fill in backstory to these characters. He's aware that this is his culture, and growing up in the Empire proper, he was told stories of Skyrim. He was told stories of these great and epic heroes, and now here he is, and so many of them are crushed underfoot. And those who aren't crushed underfoot by the Empire aren't exactly the heroes of yore. He's basically, what I'm saying is, he's going to fall in with the companions, and that is going to be his eye-opening experience, and we'll see where things go from there. But I'm already working on this follow-up character where I'm baking in backstory, because it's so tempting. And you know, the Elder Scrolls games point us to this, that the first thing we see in the game is the first thing that our character experiences. So we wake up in prison, or we wake up in the hold of a ship, or on a cart going to Helgen.
Yeah.
I want to weave in some powerful backstory for my next character, so that by the time the dragon appears in Helgen, he is already, you know, exhausted by this. And the backstory I'm kind of playing with is he fled to Skyrim because he had a run-in with a dragon in the mountains, and terrible things happened, and he sees the ability to draw the souls from these creatures as a curse. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want any part of it, but he's going to continue to run up against that. So that's going to be an interesting test of heroism and test of valor there. So that's a work in progress. I already have, you know, I'm sure you guys do too. You've got 4 Post-its on your desk. Character sketches for the next guy and the guy after that.
Will there be any footage on YouTube?
You know, I would love to. I would love to. It's finding the time.
I know, right?
Because some people who shall remain nameless, but maybe appearing on this podcast with me, set a very high bar for the kind of content that we expect on YouTube.
Yeah, you know, it was
not all of us have hours in the day. That's the person who put that thing together.
Well, you know, what you were saying before about the silent protagonist, that is so true, and it's really part of the reason why I think Aranus Arcana the way that I did, and the way that I'm putting together my new Let's Play, is I'm just drawn to this idea of what it would be like if these characters could just really communicate. Like, how strong a personality can I make here, and can I create dialogue, you know, and interesting interactions between characters in Skyrim that give it a life that, you know, I'm not able to experience when I'm just sitting down and playing. And that is something so appealing to me about doing that. It's sort of like filling in that big glaring hole in the game. right? Using it as the framework for building a story that you can share with other people. So for me, I guess I'm sort of using Skyrim and the tools that are there. I don't know, maybe like other people would write pages in a book or, film something or whatever. It's a framework for me to kind of tell the story I want to tell. But I think that's what people find interesting about it, is the fact that, hey, wait a second, this isn't the Skyrim I experienced. This is Skyrim and it's all familiar to me, but this is sort of feels new and fresh and different, and interesting. And
it's one of the valuable lessons I think you can learn from this kind of character work is by changing one's perspective, the world changes too. I think that's true in real life. After playing a great deal of Oblivion, I once decided that instead of driving to work the way that I always drove to work, I would actually, and this was back when I was actually living in Scotland, instead of driving the 5 miles down the country road to the office where I was working at the time, I was going to put on my backpack, put on my walking boots, and hike across country. And this was completely inspired by Oblivion, but I will never forget that experience because the landscape around me was completely different. By changing my own perspective, I had learned so much about just my geography, my environment, myself. It was a really eye-opening experience. And we get, as gamers, as storytellers, as creators, we get to put on these different guises, put on these different personae and just explore. And I love that this game, this incredibly rich and diverse fictional world, yields so many different opportunities to do that in so many different ways.
Well, this has been an awesome discussion, Alastair. Thank you so much for joining us. I think that all of us have had an opportunity to kind of think about vulnerability in a different way, and beyond that, just maybe take a second look at the way that we're crafting our characters and think that maybe perhaps there's more opportunity for us to create our own narratives, right? And find new ways to kind of portray that in our own minds and in our own brains and stuff like that. I mean, any insights like this are just kind of a nice refresher. And I always come away from these kinds of discussions wanting to make another character.
Yeah.
Try something new, which
That's
I can't
always the way.
afford to do right now. But still.
And I want
You
to
have a
echo
new
something
character. It just
that
isn't
I've
under
got-
your control.
Yes.
Sorry,
I want to
Alastair, go
echo
ahead.
That's quite all right. I want to echo something that I get from you guys every time I listen to the show, which is there's just no wrong way of doing this. There's no wrong way of approaching this toolbox, this sandbox, this experience. Whatever character speaks to you, whatever experience speaks to you, go with that, explore it, see where it takes you, because there's riches to be found out there in the world.
Yeah,
For sure.
I agree. And I think what we've decided, here is that Skyrim and the framework that supports the game has become really just this fantastic platform for us to experiment with all kinds of different things. And I think that I'm happy to say that this is going to be the very first episode we'll launch on YouTube that is actually going to have game footage playing as people are listening. And
awesome idea.
yeah, and what's really cool about it is that we've created the character Nim, and Nim is a first-level character. He's just gotten to Skyrim. He's a Dunmer, and that is about all that we know about Nim at this point. And I think what really makes it interesting is we are going to use some of the annotation options available to us in YouTube to basically make it into a choose-your-own-adventure. So throughout the podcast, these cards will be popping up, offering options for directions that Nim could go, things he could pursue, ideas about his background, weapons he might be interested in, places he might be interested in going, things like that. In the viewers, listeners will have an opportunity to click on those cards that they think are the best choice for Nim, and we're going to use the YouTube analytics to kind of tabulate the results, and we'll be steering Nim in those directions. And it'll be interesting just to see collectively what the community decides Nim is going to be doing with his life. So that is going to be, I think, a fun little adventure. And again, just another way, I think, to use Skyrim as a test bed for experimenting with all kinds of little things, even a little social experiment like this to see what happens. So it'll be fun, I think. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to take a listener question next. Correct, Joe?
That is correct.
Okay, so off to Crusader Mail next. Welcome back, listeners, to Crusader Mail. What do we got from the mailbag this week?
This week we have a submission from Mr. King from somewhere in the U.S. Just says U.S. So
I did not submit that. That was not me.
I didn't think you did, but they are playing on a console, so no mods.
Okay.
And what they ask is, I'm role-playing a Khajiit who is a servant of Neloth, the Telvanni wizard.
Oh, okay.
All he knows is Neloth knows his true father, but says he can't tell him. My question is, how should I make him behave around Neloth and other people? And also, any ideas what I could do with his father's situation? If we're wondering, he mostly does chores for Neloth and everyone else in Tel Mithrin.
Huh. Okay.
So,
Well, what do we know about Neloth? We know he's a really powerful
it's a powerful
Dunmer
wizard,
Telvanni wizard, and
very
he's
opinionated.
Yep, very opinionated. He's also one of my favorite NPCs in the vanilla game because he has just some of the most wonderful dialogue.
He's voiced really well.
Yeah, and he has some really funny things to say. But, he's a bit of a prick also, obviously. And, I mean, to know about a guy's parentage and basically say, no, I know this, but I'm not going to tell you, that's just mean.
So I guess maybe the question is, what kind of a backstory could there be that Neloth would be holding back?
Right.
Why would he be holding back on this character's heritage? There's got to be a reason, because
From a character development
he's
standpoint.
pretty smart, so he must see something that he's either waiting until the kid is ready or knows that it'll just bring about some kind of harm. That's kind of what I'm thinking of.
So are we, in that case, we're kind of assuming that Neloth has some sort of, some grander kind of, I guess, grandfatherly type of motivation for doing this?
Kind
a
of a
protective motivation, you're saying?
Perhaps kind of an Uncle Ben, if you will.
Uh-huh.
That's interesting. If you're opening up the possibility of the benevolent antagonist, that's a very difficult archetype to pull off. This is the antagonist who is actually opposing. The protagonist is creating conflict, is giving the story form and shape because of that, but genuinely wants what's best for the character.
Right.
The mentor character who is also a jerk, the mentor character who is also difficult to get along with, who is secretive for perhaps other reasons. There's possibly something there. Also, being a Telvanni, being rooted in that kind of isolationist, exclusionist, magic-oriented culture, there may be something in that, but I don't know, ties from there to a Khajiit.
Yeah, I know, because
I'm not sure that my knowledge goes that deep.
The Telvanni are kind of notoriously elitist,
Right.
And it's interesting to me.
Everybody needs a cat.
Yeah, right. You know what? I'm not telling you. You're a half cat. You're not full Khajiit. You're, I don't know.
If you were a whole blood, that would be fine.
Right. Your mother was Argonian.
Oh, that would be a horribly bad-looking character.
Ooh, yeah, actually it would. You can do that in the console, right?
Can you really?
You can actually mix races in the console.
Really?
It gets pretty weird, but yeah.
It does.
Yeah, if you go online and Google it, there's a way that you can go into the race menu in the game, open the console, and there's a menu, console command you can use in there to combine racial traits. And you get some really bizarre looking stuff. Some of it actually is kind of interesting.
But there's a really good opportunity there, right, for this.
Yeah.
For this reader, who's Mr. King, Mrs. King, submitted the Mr. King submitted the question: why can't you actually change some of the physical characteristics of the character in the console? I wouldn't have thought about doing that. Well,
he can't. He is on a console, so he doesn't have the option.
Yeah, I suppose. Something like Xbox.
So it really is kind of a question of he's kind of asking, how should I play the character around?
Yeah.
How should he interact or
like
or
subservience
kind of
or
yeah, and I guess is there maybe a hint of servitude in the history.
Yeah, you know what? I kind of like.
Kind of bring in that Khajiit background, which otherwise probably shouldn't be there.
I know. I like Alastair's idea, you know, of having this person who is supposed to be benevolent, appears to be protecting the protagonist, but at the same time has maybe other more selfish motivations, or is maybe holding something over them.
Right.
I think if I were him, what I would do is try to decide, first of all, what type of personality at a very basic level he wants this character to have. And I think that would sort of help determine what this character, this Khajiit's reaction would be to being controlled or kept in the dark. Right? Because, I mean, honestly, it's hard to imagine if you're going to end up playing this Khajiit as sort of a subservient person who's not willing to ask any questions or take any chances. This is a person who's just going to live in Neloth's basement his entire life.
Pretty much.
You know?
It
seems to me that if this is an individual who's saying, I want to know about my parentage.
Right.
Why are you keeping this from me? And if you're not going to tell me, I'm going to take whatever clues I can, and I'm going to get out of here as quickly as I can and go find out on my own and have an epic adventure
you might
on
not
the way.
like that very much.
Oh, how about that would lead nicely, I think, into discovering maybe that the black books hold the answer.
Ooh, yeah.
And now all of a sudden you're in Hermaeus Mora's territory.
Hell yeah. If you're not going to tell me, I'm going to go ask the Daedric Prince. Wow, that's a leap.
Watch
but
me.
Still.
Well, because,
Right.
I mean, Neloth,
Neloth. Yeah.
he's all about the black books.
Yeah, he's trying to recover them.
Right. So this
Oh.
character
I'm
would
gonna
certainly
beat you
have...
to it.
What if Mr. Khajiit is such an excellent sort of prodigy as a thief that Neloth keeps him on board because he needs him to get his hands
to
on
find
the
the books.
There you go. There's a hook
So
right
what's
there.
so special about these books? Do they
So
have some kind of
then-
knowledge of my past?
Curiosity kills
Kill
the
the
cat, quite literally.
And as we talked last week or last episode, over and over and,
And
over.
and over.
Yes. Yeah, I
But
like
in
that as a premise.
But in that case, also the benevolent antagonist has a lot to gain from it, from continuing to push and prod and make
Right.
life difficult.
Yes. Or, well, think about this too. One of the things that we look for in stories, right, is the conflict is never really over. You're jumping from one conflict to the next conflict, which is heightened and brings you into the next one, right? And if we have, a rebellious Khajiit who wants to understand something about his lost parentage, who at some point along the way decides to separate from Neloth, who he feels is hiding things from him, and take matters into his own hands, and he pursues one of these black books, or does something at Neloth's request to go get a black book, but then takes the book himself and actually reads it, or something like that, right?
Sure.
He separates himself from Neloth, but then finds himself in even worse trouble as he is now being controlled by Hermaeus Mora,
Right.
the Daedric prince. And what is Hermaeus Mora going to make him do at that
You
point?
can take
right?
some of those ideas too and root them in the character's very early history. I was thinking about the relationship between the Telvanni and the Twin Lamps, the abolitionist group back in Morrowind, because of course so many Khajiit slaves were freed during that whole storyline, and possibly there's some kind of special quality to this protagonist character. I don't know if you guys are familiar at all with the Discworld novels by Terry Pratchett.
Oh, I
but
love the Discworld.
Rincewind, when he was a young wizard, opened a forbidden book of magic and had one of the ancient spells just leap from the page into his mind.
Yeah.
If this Argonian, perhaps as a child, perhaps back in, because we know that Neloth was back in Vardenfell during the Morrowind era, so perhaps at that time something magical stuck to this Khajiit and has followed him and is required to recover the books.
Yeah.
Some kind of special,
yeah.
when you're opening up this kind of, because an exceptional skill can't be Oh, I guess an exceptional skill can be enough, but it would have to be an absolutely exceptional
Yeah,
skill. But
right.
you can also lock off these conflicts by removing alternatives. You can force this guy to deal with this character, and possibly a character for whom he's developing a genuine affection, he's developing a genuine respect, and that's going to conflict with his own goals and desires as he progresses down that path.
Well, as the protagonist in this game, it's assumed, right, that you have some special abilities, right? Whether you play through something like alternate start or not, one way or another, you're the Dragonborn. It just is what it is, right? So I like this concept, and you could actually play this as perhaps, at some point there's something in this Khajiit's lineage, right, that makes him innately capable of reading one of these black books.
Right.
Neloth is
good.
interested in the black books, right? But maybe Neloth does not have the capacity to get what he needs from them, and he's looking for somebody who has the capacity to read them. And perhaps this is a Khajiit family that, he's aware of, that his family has had associations with in the past. He knows enough about their background, or even perhaps somewhere along the way, this is a clan or a family of Khajiit that have served the, Neloth's or House Telvanni as servants or whatever, right? But you could kind of put together something like that, right? Where the Khajiit is basically a tool for extracting the knowledge from the books that Neloth needs to do whatever he's got in mind. He's a tool.
Right.
Cool.
Right. That's interesting.
So,
I'm digging that.
yeah.
A lot of options there.
Right. And all of this stuff still has you in Solstheim. I mean, take a character like this who finally, breaks the bonds of House Telvanni, only to find themselves in a situation where they're beholden to a Daedric prince, and then let them loose in Skyrim and see what they decide to do. Whether they rebel against this relationship with Hermaeus Mora, or whether they embrace it,
Right.
and do something like I've had, a character who was, kind of completely devoted to Hermaeus Mora, and it was their mission to go across Skyrim, finding ancient and hidden knowledge and taking it away from those people who had it for Hermaeus Mora, right?
Right.
So you could go a lot of different directions. That's the one thing I do like about Hermaeus Mora in particular. The fact that Hermaeus Mora is focused on knowledge, that is kind of general enough that you could create a premise for doing darn near anything in game. Now it makes sense to go and, raid that castle that's filled with necromancers, because you're after their spell tomes, and you're after, whatever it is they're hiding in there, those kinds of things.
And you can backfill motivation, as you said. It can be about acquiring that knowledge and power for yourself. It can be about preventing it from falling into the wrong hands. It can be you can layer whatever motivation you need to remain consistent onto that essential quest. That's good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It's sort of reminiscent of your character, Joe, right? Kind of, things have been withheld from her, and now she is coming out of her shell to try to take anything she can. So I like it. Very good. Anything else? Is that it for tonight?
I think that's it for tonight.
Wonderful.
We've got a few others, but that
was
one
great.
is one I wanted to address.
Well, thank you so much, Alastair, for sticking with us for so long. This was just a fantastic conversation. I think we would all love, to have you on again sometime in the future.
Absolutely.
Anytime, guys.
It would be interested to keep. I would be interested to keep track of your progress in Skyrim, and say a few months down the line, get back together and see how things have come together for you and what you've decided to do.
I'm inspired to document this whole adventure perhaps a little more closely than I otherwise would. So I'm thinking, if I can't make YouTube videos, if I can't commit to that, maybe I'll put together some kind of blog post with some screen caps and tell the story as I go.
Works.
That might be a more
a
more simple way of approaching it. But guys, it has been an absolute pleasure. I love your show. I'll be back anytime you'll have me.
Well, that is wonderful. For those of you who are interested in learning more about Alastair and Lonnie and some of the things that they're doing online, you can go to storywonk.com. You can also find him on iTunes. There's so much amazing content out there. Plus, all of your podcasts are going out to your YouTube channel too, right?
They absolutely are. Yes, youtube.com/storywonk,
Yep.
along with occasional video game experiments. We've done a little Hearthstone. We've done a little World of Warcraft. I'm going to sit down with Lonnie, my wife, and play through the fantastic environmental exploration puzzle game Gone Home, a very different kind of
I've
game,
heard
a
about
very
that.
unauthored kind of game compared to Skyrim. But
Wow.
that is a absolutely beautiful kind of progressive narrative take on the video game space. So we're going to do a playthrough of that hopefully sometime in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned to the YouTube channel for that.
Awesome.
And I'll be keeping a close eye on your YouTube channel too, because I'm so excited about this this project. This is so cool.
Yeah, we hope you'll participate.
I'll be
Cast
right
your
there.
vote. Yeah, so your blog, is that Paper Bullets? Or just
No, I'll
that?
put that up. I'll put that up on
On
Storywonk.
Storywonk?
I have a
Okay.
blog of my own over at alastairstephens.com, but that's
Okay.
impossible to spell. No human being can spell that name. No one can find it. So
Well,
all of that will go up at
just
Storywonk.
get us
That
a-
is amazing.
Just get us a Bitly link.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. You have a good evening, and say hi to Lonnie for us all here.
I absolutely will, guys. Thanks so much. It's been
All
a
right.
blast.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Alistair.
Thank you.
Good night, guys.
Okay, so Alistair, in the room we have Joe Lillidahl.
Hello.
Hi, Joe.
How are you?
I'm
and,
doing very well.
Excellent.
and Mr. Matt Kelly.
Good evening.
Hi, Matt. You guys did a great job last week, by the way. I just listened to the
Oh.
14th episode, the
Thank you.
Stewless episode. You guys were great.
Stewless. Well, we
We were in a completely
tried.
different location. Joe and I were sort of feeling the edges of the envelope to see what Stu would put up with. And he didn't come into this recording session with a machete, so we must have
No.
done okay.
No,
That's a win.
I came unglued at home and then just spent the weekend stewing, and then by Monday I was fine. So, no, I'm fine.
You have one old message.
Character Crusade is a proud member of the N4G TV and Maker Studios Partner Network. N4G TV partners have access to exclusive production assets that are second to none and maintain full creative control over their channels. That's you, and that's me, and that's these Crusaders. Partner benefits include 24/7 customer support, SEO, what's SEO? A dedicated graphics team, I love me some graphics, a catalog of more than 400,000 licensed music and sound effects, and more. Learn more. Learn more at n4gtv.com and tell them Jimmy sent you.
End of messages.